Good morning, everybody. We only have an hour, and we're just going to jump right into it. All right, let's start with the Department of State. Anastasia, what's new and exciting in the world with visas at the Department of State?
Okay, well, thank you, Kelly. So I'll just hit on a couple of highlights and things that we just want to bring to everyone's attention. There will be panels dealing with these issues with much more substance. So if you are interested in these, there'll be the Department of State Open Forum and other opportunities. But I think probably the newest thing is the administration's interest in social media accounts continues. So in continuation of the DS 5535 supplemental questionnaire for visa applicants, which asks certain applicants for social media identifiers, from May 31st, all visa applicants are required to disclose social media platforms, usernames, all email addresses, and phone numbers used for the last 5 years. And this is requested on both the DS-160 and the DS-260, so all visa, NIV, and IV applicants. And also, this information on the platform and identifiers is optional on the ESTA application. So that's a consideration if you do have that traveling visa-free and applying online with the ESTA. So there are a few highlights in the non-immigrant visa world. We'll start with some good news, the positive developments. The bilateral treaties with New Zealand and Israel have finally resulted in E1 and E2s for New Zealanders. And in addition to the long-held E1, Israeli nationals finally are able to apply as E2 treaty investors. So for the not so good news, probably something you've noticed in the results of a lot of applications, but the data from the Department of State is pretty clear. Denial rates for visa applications are way up to the tune of 1 million. So in fiscal year 2018, 1 million fewer NIV issuances were, so basically we went from 10 million in 2016 visas issued to 9 million in just 2 fiscal years. So a much higher chance that applications are being refused. And these are for non-immigrant visas. On the immigrant side, the Department of State's kind of re-envisioned interpretation of the public charge rules in the Foreign Affairs Manual have resulted in a pretty steep increase in denial rates. So again, in 2016, there were a little over 1,000 refusals, 1,076 public charge refusals in immigrant visa matters. In fiscal year 2018, it was 13,450. So without any formal rule, the rulemaking process for the Department of Homeland Security, USCIS, is still ongoing, but the Department of State has implemented their new interpretations. So also, not quite the Department of State, but tied in with embassies, the international field offices are closing. So the local filed I-130s and the benefits that could be sought from USCIS, usually housed in U.S. consulates abroad. They'll close their international offices, starting with Ciudad Juarez in Mexico and Manila in the Philippines. And all offices around the world outside the U.S. are scheduled to close by March 10, 2020. So, and already they're starting to roll back what they will adjudicate at those offices. So beginning July 1st, so this is coming, USCIS will no longer accept the I-407 record of abandonment of LPR status at international field offices. So those will now have to be submitted to the US-based offices. So I think from what we're seeing overall that we have some challenges, and of course things are non-reviewable at the Department of State level at visa, certainly for the non-immigrant visas. So just to keep that in mind with your advice. And I think just as far as just not quite Department of State, but tied in with Customs and Border Protection, there's really a big move to go more digital and for imaging and to have this record of departures and entries based on facial recognition. So that's something that's developing, and we can hear more about that at the CBP Open Forum, where we have CBP representatives with us tomorrow. And finally, we did get invited to the Kentucky Consular Center. So this is a Department of State office that deals with all those duplicate copies when you send them to USCIS. They're the ones that upload into the PIM system so that the consular officers are able to verify the data and issue the visas. So they are ready for USCIS to be digital, and hopefully one day we won't have to send in those copies, but that's probably not going to be anytime soon. But what we did learn while we were at the Kentucky Consular Center is all those duplicate copies that you send to the KCC, they're uploaded, you send them to USCIS, they're uploaded onto a truck and driven to this consular service center in the middle of Kentucky. And then they're uploaded digitally into the system. And then they shred them, and they have a contractor that collects them and turns them into toilet paper.
Is that true?
So that's your hot topic tip that you got. Just think about that.
Well, speaking of number 2, Farshad, travel ban, is that still in effect? What's the current status of the travel ban?
Yes, the Muslim ban, also known as PP 9465, is still in full effect, and the waiver process is still very problematic. There are updates, there are waiver litigation, there are some policy and advocacy efforts, and also FOIA. The Department of State's stats just was released by Senator Van Hollen's office on June 10th. It's about 30-some pages, lots of numbers. I'm not good with numbers. I'm still trying to find out what is the exact stats for per country denials and waivers, but I defer to number experts. But overall, the Senator's office released that there is a 5.1 percentage of the waiver approval, which is even lower than what they projected before. That was 6%. Litigation efforts, there are 2 class action lawsuits, and then there are 2 individual lawsuits that are more visible, and also individual actions. In terms of the class actions, that they are currently challenging Section 3C waivers, and the arguments are largely on APA, and some constitutional argument about the waiver process. These lawsuits do not challenge the constitutionality of the executive order, and these cases are Emami versus Nielsen and Parse versus Pompeo. Both cases are related and before Judge Donato in Northern District of California. And co-counsels for Parse are Asian Law Caucus, Iranian American Bar Association, National Immigration Law Center, CARE, and 2 other firms. And co-counsels for Emami case are Muslim Advocates and Lotfi Law. Both cases have survived the motion to dismiss, and both cases are moving forward for discovery. We are waiting for the government to produce the administrative record, which will help determine the next steps. And 2 other cases, IRAP versus Trump litigation. This case focuses on constitutionality of the travel ban, largely on establishment clause, due process, and equal protection claims. The fight isn't over. Early May, Judge Chang denied the government's motion to dismiss and is allowing the cases to proceed with discovery. And then the Section 6 litigation, Al-Harbi case in Eastern District of New York challenged Section 6 of the executive order. And specifically, there were a series of cases that were individuals had visa approval letters, mostly from U.S. consulate in Djibouti, sorry. But then they were denied. And then last year, Judge Kogan had issued a preliminary injunction for the named plaintiffs. It wasn't a class action, but unfortunately in April, he reversed his decision, and the case isn't moving forward right now. And there are some individual mandamus actions if you are in AILA's Middle Eastern Interest Group listserv. You can see our members are challenging individually these cases as mandamus in district courts. In terms of policy and advocacy, there are some efforts. Policy that amends the underlying INA 212F. Representative Judy Chu, California 27th District in the U.S. House of Representatives, and Senator Chris Coons of Delaware in U.S. Senate, they introduced national origin-based anti-discrimination for non-immigrants, No Ban Act, as companion bills H.R. 2214 and S. 1123. Notably, there is validity clause that would repeal the travel ban, refugee ban, and the asylum ban. Policy that defunds repeal the ban, Judy Chu, California 27, and also Senator Chris Murphy, Democratic of Connecticut, introduced companion bills in the House and Senate to block implementation of the President Trump's executive order, blocking the travel bans majority Muslim countries. The bill, H.R. 810 and S. 246, would prohibit the use of any funds or fees to implement the executive order 13780 and signed on March 6, 2017. Now, reporting to Congress on stats, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland is spearheading the efforts to hold the Department of State accountable and implemented the reporting obligation of the Department of State. And actually, the report that was released to him, to his office, and he publishes that report on his website. And there are obviously other efforts, the FOIA efforts, IRAP and Muslim advocates in separate efforts they've been pursuing. Information about waivers and travel ban FOIA. There were a set of documents produced in each FOIA request cases. And in fact, IRAP, I mean, there were releases incrementally. And last week, I believe there were new releases to IRAP for FOIA that has to be reviewed. Now, the recommendations for travel waiver, ban waiver for today's panel at 4 p.m. Also, I recommend to attend the Saturday's Gloves Off Administrative Processing at 2.
Thank you, Farshad. So let's talk some more about litigation. Jeremy, are there any significant immigration cases left this term at the Supreme Court, or maybe not immigration related, but maybe immigration impact?
Thanks, Kelly. I was just saying we're sharing the mic like Donnie and Marie for these. And I'm literally on SCOTUS blog right now because the Supreme Court is announcing opinions, and one of them I'm about to talk about. In Pereira v. Sessions, issued about a year ago, Justice Kennedy gave us one of his last concurrences before retiring, stating, quote, "It seems necessary and appropriate to reconsider in an appropriate case the premises that underlie Chevron and how the courts implemented that decisions." Indeed, how much deference should our Article III courts, the real courts, extend to an administrative agency, especially when the agency itself has run amok? The time has come for the, quote, real judges to reassert themselves. And perhaps this moment will arrive, perhaps as early as today, with the Supreme Court case Kaiser v. Wilkie, which is a Veterans Affairs case with the potential to profoundly impact immigration law. The issue here is not a direct attack on what's called Chevron deference. That's where courts defer to an agency's reasonable interpretation of an ambiguous statute. The starting point is our, or Seminole Rock deference, the virtually unchecked deference extended to an agency's interpretation of a regulation. Even when that agency interpretation was not previously published or subjected to any APA notice and comment. We know that from prior opinions, Justices Thomas and Gorsuch find our deference constitutionally suspect. According to SCOTUS blog, both Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh appeared troubled by the idea of our deference. Conversely, the liberal wing of the Supreme Court favor this lopsided, unchecked agency deference. So the deciding vote will likely be Justice Alito, the sole dissenter in Pereira. Stay tuned. I'll check again.
So, I mean, we all agree that deference is being abused, but like, what key moments from the past 12 months? Like, give us some examples.
The Attorney General, along with the DOJ employees who call themselves the Board of Immigration Appeals, continue to provide good reason for why there needs to be a meaningful check on administrative agencies. The 8-1 Pereira Supreme Court decision itself was overruled by the BIA. Starting with Bermudez Coda and continuing with Pena Mejia and Miranda Cordero, the BIA reverted to its previous legal position, which is that the immigration court itself, the supposedly neutral finder of law and fact, and an agency that's not empowered to serve a notice to appear, can somehow remedy DHS's defective charging document by serving a notice of hearing. There's only one word for that I will say in this forum, and that is outrageous. Until we hear again from the Supreme Court on this topic, we await the circuit courts. Thus far in the Ninth Circuit in Lorenzo Lopez versus Barr, that panel directly said Miranda Cordero was wrongly decided. For purposes of 42B, cancellation of removal, the panel concluded the continuous residency clock does not stop upon service of a notice of hearing because the court service of a hearing notice does not perfect or remedy a notice to appear that fails to notify a person when to appear. The Seventh Circuit also agreed with that an NTA lacking a date and time is defective, but they characterize it as a claim processing rule violation. Now, what that means and why it's so hot for you guys is that that violation in the Seventh Circuit's view may result in the termination of a case, but only if a timely objection is raised. And that case is Ortiz-Santiago versus Barr. In other news, matters of Thomas and Thompson, Attorney General Barr is questioning whether immigration judges should extend full faith and credit to a state court's grant of post-conviction relief. Perhaps we'll soon see a version of Silva Trevino in immigration court where many trials become necessary to determine the state court's intent in granting relief. In Castillo-Perez, former acting AG Whitaker certified a case to himself assessing the impact of multiple drunk driving convictions on good moral character and discretion. Now, to be clear, from my experience, such convictions don't ever cast a great light on our clients, but the conviction itself most of the time is a strict liability offense and does not render a person inadmissible or deportable. Most importantly, it's not an offense that results per the INA in an automatic negative good moral character finding. They're both good moral character analysis is individualized and case-based, subject to case-by-case adjudication, and now the administrative agency is seeking to insert additional terms into the statutory definition.
But it's not just the DOJ that's departing with the INA and law, right?
That certainly is correct. Obviously, I only have like 7 minutes, but outside of DOJ, DHS has tried to virtually replace the INA with regards to when and where a person can apply for asylum, Our members, along with our partners in the legal community, successfully obtained an injunction preventing the government from barring asylum relief to individuals who enter the United States through the southern border at a place other than a port of entry. The agency is owed no deference at all when the statute is plain. And of course, other examples abound. Remain in Mexico, TPS, DACA rescissions, interpretation of unlawful presence. We could go on and on.
So,
No, please.
So there's lots to learn about the law and litigation, and but Alan, what's going on in the world of employer immigration compliance?
Absolutely nothing. So, welcome to season 7. The Night King is on the rise, and we are in real threat and concern. All the other kingdoms, UCIS, the Department of Labor, ICE, and even the Employment Rights is looking to enter your kingdom and take you down. So compliance is now no longer a thing, it is the way of life, and you should be very concerned about it. And AILA is here to prepare you for that with our lunch session that we're having on Friday at noon in Sun A, which is navigating complex issues in employer compliance. We also have a teleconference July 25th that I will be on that will also help you get there. And if that's not enough, the fall conference, September 13th, we have a whole track to bring you up to speed on everything you know about the different kingdoms that are trying to take you down and the Night King that is on the rise. That's after all of your money. So the things that we should consider and remember that this is really the beginning of family separation because they were picking up people at work from these different companies and therefore not allowing them to reconnect with their kids that might be in school or might be in daycare. So while that's sort of forgotten in the world of employer compliance, the same thing happens with us, right? It's the same disruption. It's a disruption to the economy, to the employer trying to supply goods to the market. It's also a disruption to the family units who may have some equity to remain in the United States, as these people have probably been here. In my case, many of the people who get separated have been in the U.S. for 10 or more years from that employer, and it's just an ICE enforcement. So what you should know is that it's a slow tick, right? You're not on the fast run that we have people at the border and getting the news story. But since 2007, where there were 402 site investigations, 402, to today, where there are over 5,000 site investigations going on from different agencies and the uptick of H-1Bs, that you should be concerned and aware and informing your clients at all take that this is what must be done to ensure the gates. And so if your client doesn't have an employment and compliance officer and they only have a general counsel, then sometimes you might need to talk to HR who's concerned, but then also talk to the general counsel who needs to be aware of these compliance issues, because today what we know is that there are going to be more ICE audits in the future with regards to I-9 compliance. That's already happened in many states. And we actually have a map on the AILA.org which can show you exactly the rated areas, which are pretty much consistent with welcoming cities, and the rest of the map which can sort of be invaded. So just sort of look at that sort of focus. There was a time under the Obama administration where they were only looking at certain industries, but now they're looking at all industries. And most of those industries have a large number of our clients. And when you think about this, these aren't industries that are just doing immigrant visas. These are American employers, so that opens your network to a greater marketing perspective to understand that everybody is involved, including you and your firm, right? I've helped a lot of law firms be compliant with their I-9s. A lot of lawyers out there don't have I-9s completed appropriately. So you need to be aware that there is a light on everyone that is sort of focused on these sort of key areas. And the biggest thing that's happened right now in a very confusing way is these no-match letters have been returned from the Social Security Administration, which basically says that there is a mismatch. But this isn't enough for you to absolutely have to disrupt this person's employment, but be aware of this, and that also goes to the IRS. But that is also a footprint for ICE or some other time when they come in to sort of say, listen, you got these mismatch letters, why didn't you take any action, right? But as part of the letter, it says that this isn't enough. So it sort of is a confusing world for employees who are not immigration specialists like we are to sort of decide what the appropriate remedies and the steps are once you receive one of these letters. In addition to that, when TPS is good today and not good tomorrow, and DACA is good today and may not be good tomorrow, and you have to go through and do your compliance on your I-9 forms, you don't know what to put, because in some cases, just like with your extensions, you don't have any documentation from the from the government service saying exactly what the employment date, expiration date is, and what action you need to take. So you need to be aware of all of those things, which becomes even more rampant in the world of extensions, right? Of making sure that when you file that extension, and the person's status is expired, that you actually keep up with the days, because that will come back to haunt you later on when you file an adjustment of status potentially, because petitions are taking much longer than they were in the past, and the work authorization isn't always granted. So I think that's a big change from when I first started immigration, where we didn't have these daily concerns on I-9s to make sure that you knew things because things were timely and coming through, such as EADs, right? Extensions, notices, TPS, the federal announcement. All those things are an extra burden on an employer who doesn't know immigration law, who might not have access to a computer. So in addition to that, you have the government also pushing you forward into this larger world of saying, I want you to join our highest level of compliance program. Here, be a part of Image. Here, be a part of E-Verify, which may be coming in the future. And while I don't think the programs are perfect, I think they're helpful, but they're only helpful to an employer who is able to maintain a good I-9 practice. If you are not have a good I-9 practice, which means you do it in a timely fashion, joining E-Verify may be the kiss of death for you because it makes an electric track record of all the actions that you've taken with regards to compliance, and that's problematic. In addition, there are a lot of non-sophisticated employers who think E-Verify replaces the paper requirement for the I-9 form, which it does not. Those are the two major issues that I sort of see right now ramping up in employer compliance. It's just the lack of knowledge. In addition to that, right now the government has extended the comments for the I-9 form, which I think all employers should be able to say something about the form through the July 5th. When I first started, it was 1 page. Now it's 2 pages. And it's supposed to be the simplest form that takes you only a couple of minutes, but it has now taken employers days, and I get constant calls about the questions answered. So be aware of that, and please come out to the different things that we're offering to help bring you up to speed.
So it's not just rumblings, with the southern kingdoms. I think that north of the wall, there's some issues too. I hear that there have been some changes in how CBP is handling L1s for Canadians processing at the border.
That's right. CBP has stopped processing L1 extensions for Canadians at U.S. ports of entry. This was a major policy change, and it was completely unannounced in advance, as is the fashion these days. CBP headquarters has confirmed that there is an exception to this new unannounced rule against processing L1 extensions for Canadians if the Canadian is a commuter or the intermittent L, someone who doesn't live in the United States, spends less than 50% of their time in the US and actually resides in Canada. And then they are still supposed to be able to process an L1 extension at the border. I say supposed to be able because, in fact, many of the ports of entry are not honoring this exception that CBP headquarters has announced. So surprise, surprise, inconsistency. One of the interesting wrinkles, I think, of this new policy is on blanket Ls. So for Canadians who are working for an employer with an approved blanket petition, does this mean that when they want to seek an extension, they now have to file an individual petition with USCIS? Because that sort of defeats the purpose of having the blanket. Or could there be a workaround for Canadians in that situation who might then apply for a visa at a consular post based upon the approved blanket petition and then present that at the port of entry to come back? So some people have tried this. There are some posts in Canada that have refused to issue those visas to Canadians, saying, we can't give you a visa, you're Canadian, you're visa exempt. And then there are other reports of people having success at other consular posts around the world in applying for L1 visas as Canadians based on the blanket and then using that to come back. So again, we see some inconsistency. The State Department has not given any official word on whether this is permissible or not, but again, some people are able to do it at posts outside Canada. So it's a mess, and if you want to have more information about this, you probably should attend the CBP Open Forum tomorrow, where this will be discussed among many other topics, and we're very grateful to have CBP with us to go over these issues.
So interesting. I primarily do family-based and complex deportation work, but even I have been paying attention, and it sure feels like the H-1B is under assault. I mean, am I crazy, or is there actual evidence for that?
Yeah, there actually kind of is. And CIS has published it on its website, happily for us, proudly advertising the results of its assault on the H-1B category. Recently, the National Foundation for American Policy published a report in April 2019 that analyzes all that USCIS data that's available on the USCIS Data Hub. And if you haven't read that report, it's definitely worth your time if you're a business immigration practitioner, because it will affirm for you that you're not crazy and that things really are getting worse. Just to highlight a few statistics, the denial rate for new H-1B petitions rose from 6% in 2015 to 32% in the first quarter of 2019. The denial rate for H-1B extension petitions has risen from 3% in 2015 to 18% in the first quarter of 2019. And at the end of the first quarter of fiscal year 2019, RFEs were issued in 60% of all H-1B petitions filed. I'm going to say that one more time and let it really sink in. 60%. That means when you file an H-1B petition now, it is more likely than not that your case will receive an RFE.
Wow.
So much for the preponderance of the evidence standard.
So what are the main areas that we're seeing them being challenged?
Well, CIS has also rather helpfully provided its top 10 list of RFEs and why they issue RFEs. So I'm going to just cover the first, highlight the biggest ones. So specialty occupation, as anyone who does business immigration knows, is the biggest trigger for RFEs right now. The accusation that the job that is being proffered and mentioned in the H-1B petition does not qualify as a specialty occupation. Then there's challenging the validity of the employer-employee relationship, and this is particularly prominent with third-party placement scenarios where you have a consulting situation and the beneficiary will be employed by company A but working at company B as part of some kind of contract. Availability of off-site work. So again, going after the third-party placement scenarios where the beneficiary will be placed at a location that is remote from the petitioner's company. That's number 4, or number 3. And number 4 is the beneficiary's qualifications. We are seeing a ton of boilerplate RFEs right now on degree issues, challenging credential evaluations, really getting creative with regard to the standards for credentials evaluators, by which I mean completely ignoring the actual standards for credentials evaluations. And then there's the 5th reason is maintenance of status, and this is happening a lot. We're seeing this with F1 to H-1B petitions, challenging students' status and whether they've maintained their status appropriately, whether they've had too many days of unemployment under OPT, et cetera. So really making sure that you document the heck out of the status maintenance. Another thing is when you're moving from employer A to employer B, they're challenging whether there is, whether the beneficiary maintained the employment relationship with employer A before trying to move to employer B. We used to be able to just provide some of the most recent pay stubs from the previous employer when doing a transfer petition to another employer, but now they're wanting to see things like, no, that's not enough. We can't just have work payment records because that's just, the employer making that up. We have to have work produced by the beneficiary as part of that employment to prove that they really worked there. Again, bye-bye preponderance of the evidence. Number 6, availability of work on site. So this, even in cases where the beneficiary is working at the employer's location, not a third-party placement situation. They're challenging whether there will be work sufficiently available for the full period of time that's requested in the H-1B petition. And I always want to respond to these RFEs by saying, hey, Mr. USCIS adjudicating officer, do you think you're going to have work for the next 3 years? Because the Trump administration is trying to put you guys out of business. Prove to me that you can work for the next 3 years. This is why no one in my office allows me to respond to RFEs. Number 7, the LCA doesn't correspond to the petition. Challenges to the correct SOC code, whether you've chosen the correct code, whether you've chosen the correct wage level. So these are the top reasons that these RFEs are being issued. We've all seen these in our practices. Folks, the law has not changed. Only the way that it is being administered has changed, or misadministered in this case. So it is our job to hold them accountable through litigation if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely terrible, but I do have to say that the silver lining here is, as a deportation defense attorney, we're constantly fighting the battle and the struggle, and misery loves company, so welcome to the club. Marketa, what are the new regulatory priorities in the business immigration area?
So in the business immigration area, the agency certainly has talked a lot about making new rules, but we haven't seen much final regulatory activity in H-1Bs or other business areas. One regulation that was finalized and became effective earlier this year is, of course, the H-1B lottery regulation, which had two main components. One was the reversal of the order of the H-1B lottery selection with the actually explicitly stated purpose of skewing the results of the H-1B lottery toward having more selections of U.S. master's degree holders in the H-1B lottery. And that was effective at the time of this past H-1B lottery, and it was implemented during that filing season. And we did see in our office, I don't know how you all thought about the effect on your own caseloads, but in our office, we did see a somewhat higher selection rate of U.S. master's cases. That did go into effect. The other portion of that regulation that was suspended and did not go in effect for the last round of H-1B lottery filings was this new pre-registration system that they're talking about. And the purpose of it is to address really the absurd system, of course, that we currently operate under, where we file H-1B petitions on April 1st. We file 3 times as many as we know are going to be receipted, and then we wait to get 2/3 of those back in the mail when they're rejected. This portion of the regulation, the whole regulation was issued fairly close to the time of filing for the H-1B lottery cases. But mercifully, this portion of it was suspended for at least this past lottery season to give the government the opportunity to work out the kinks. So we'll see if it goes into effect for the next lottery season. There's also discussion about there being a fee for the pre-registration. Right now, of course, we submit our H-1B filings with filing fees on the assumption that they may be selected. The pre-registration, there will be a fee. We don't know what it is. They're saying it'll be something nominal. And it's something I think that many in the immigration bar actually support, because it will deter mass filings, speculative filings by large filers that I think many of us worry will eat up the numbers for employees that the companies may not even be actually pursuing. So, but we'll see how that rolls out. In the meantime, I would recommend that you all start to think about how you're going to amend your processes for the H-1B filing season for next year, under the assumption that the pre-registration process will go into effect. When you look at the discussion of the government about this, they think what this is going to mean is that we will spend a few minutes compiling a list of names and some other data points to send in on behalf of our clients. And of course, that's not true. There's a certain amount of the analysis and preparation that goes into preparing a full H-1B package that's going to have to go into determining who is going to go on that list for the pre-registration under that new process. So that's something that's important to consider, both how to structure that process differently and frankly, how to charge for it, and how to have that discussion with your clients, with your corporate clients, about how you would be charging for a pre-registration versus the process that we have in place now. So begin to think about that. This isn't exactly regulatory, but just in terms of premium processing for this last lottery season, unlike the previous cap season when we saw the broad suspension of premium processing that lasted for a long time and led to the really unfortunate result of a number of H-1B cap cases not being processed by the end of the fiscal year, and the cap gap problems and other problems that came along with that. This year, the government did roll it out in a way that is a bit more, addresses those issues in a little bit better way, I think, for us and our clients, rolling it out in the 2-phased approach. we were able to file for change of status cases, premium process right at the beginning, and we've been able to upgrade the remaining CAP cases, which were filed as consular notification cases, to premium processing as of June 10th. So hopefully this will avoid those issues that we had last year with cases being very, very long delayed under the H-1B cap. I know with the second round, the consular processing cases, where the premium processing started June 10th, I know my email box is filled with receipt emails for those, and we're starting to see some decisions as well. So good luck to all of us on that, given all the issues that Jennifer mentioned earlier. Also, one other quick filing tip while we're talking about this: make sure that you're carefully looking at the filing locations for the I-129s. They've been changing them without much notice. Of course, there was the change that happened already previously, where the jurisdiction over the I-129 changed from the work site to the principal place of business. That's already been in place for some time, but the way that the states are listed under the different service centers has actually been changing. So if you have templates that you use, or if your assistants are using some sort of checklist, make sure that that's up to date, and we make a practice out of checking those regularly when we file our H-1Bs, because it does seem to change without notice, and in some cases, having a case rejected because of jurisdiction is very problematic. In terms of other regulations, there are a number of important regulations on the regulatory agenda. The one that I think a lot of us are watching very carefully is the H-4 EAD rescission regulation, which would remove the ability of H-4 dependents to be able to apply for work authorization cards. This has been really a priority for the administration. They've been talking about this for a long time. It's going through the regulatory process. It's currently still at OMB. I think both the government and many of us thought it would be out already, given how much emphasis the administration has placed on this particular regulation. But there was a lot of comment and response to the government in the regulatory process about the economics and the economic analysis that the government was using about the impact of the H-4, the economic impact of the H-4 EAD, and a lot of very smart people who know economics better than the government does had some important feedback on that. So that's one of the reasons that the regulation is taking a longer period of time. And I think for us and our clients, the longer it takes, the better it is, because this is for not only the H-4 spouses, but for a lot of the H-1B themselves, really, really important for their spouses, who often are professionals in their own right, to be able to continue to work. Another regulation on the regulatory agenda that we're also watching very carefully because of the implications that it will have if it's published, is the rewrite of the specialty occupation definition. And the factors that Jennifer was talking about earlier that we're all using to respond to these H-1B RFEs on specialty occupation with respect to whether a specialized degree is normally required and whether the job is sufficiently complex to warrant the degree, and the industry practices and so on. All of those are from the regulation. None of those are from the statute. And the agency obviously has the authority to rewrite its statute, and to rewrite the regulation. And in fact, that is what it is doing. And this is something that many of us are concerned about, particularly because it specifically references the Buy American, Hire American executive order, which we know would, essentially the purpose of it would be to make the H-1B much tougher to get than it is right now, and give the agency stricter and tighter standards to be able to adjudicate those cases. So we have not yet seen a proposed regulation that we can respond to. We're watching this very carefully, and when it is published, we will be pulling out all the stops of our resources to respond to that as best as we can, because this is going to be a critically, critically important regulation for many of our members and our clients.
So pulling out all the stops, I mean, what does that mean? Are we going to sue them? Like, what's AILA going to do?
Well, I think we have a couple of ideas. I think obviously there's the notice and comment period during which we will submit very well-drafted comments in response, and we will be looking to work, obviously, with our allies, with the Chamber and Compete USA and other coalition allies that we have will also care very deeply about this issue. But of course, litigation is something that we'll be thinking about very carefully, both in the context of trying to challenge this regulation if it's issued, and if it is, it's going to be complex, and I think there will be a lot to look at there in terms of potential litigation.
I can't wait. So Ben, you're in the the hot seat right now. It's not all just misery, right? We're fighting back. We're doing stuff. What's AILA doing?
Well, we're doing a lot. I think we've talked a lot about many of the efforts that we're making with Congress to try to raise awareness about these concerns. Certainly been promoting and providing resources on litigation and advocacy. Look, let me start at the macro level. The reality is, unfortunately, that this sort of climate of chaos and uncertainty is going to continue. We've got acting directors everywhere in government, so we're not really even sure who's in charge, which means that the White House is in charge, and there's no sign that the president has any interest in moderating his positions on immigration or changing his strategy on the politics of immigration. In fact, as we enter a political year, I think we're going to see certainly an increase in the rhetoric, and I think there's going to be an ongoing effort by the administration to continue to throw out evidence of their war on immigration and immigrants. It is the red meat that he's continued to throw at his base, it's how he fires up that very consistent percentage of the population that supports him. The problem is that it's a fairly significant percentage of the Republican Party. Not fairly, it is a very large percentage of the Republican Party. So there are very few people who are running for office who have any intention on the Republican side of running against the president with his approval ratings within the Republican Party. So that means that I think you're going to see a lot of people either empowered to do these kinds of, continue these kinds of initiatives, or you're going to see a lot of politicians who are simply afraid to stand up against it. So the environment is going to be tough. It's going to continue to be tough. And it's going to be chaotic, and it's going to be chaotic for a reason. This is not an accident. This is a strategy. The plan is to throw out so many new policies, to put out so much fear and uncertainty that folks like us will be too confused or spread too thin to be able to respond. So I think this environment calls for us to be more disciplined than ever before, not to join the chaos, not to join the chorus of indignation all the time, although certainly indignation is appropriate some of the time, but to join in the effort to be solutions-oriented. The country, our clients, our profession really calls us to be those voices that can calmly say, there is a path forward. There is a way to respond to this chaos. There is a solution to the problems that existed before and that are being created now. And I think the bottom line strategy is to remember that we are not victims. We are not powerless. We are, as Marketa eloquently said, we are 16,000 immigration lawyers, right? We are, if you don't have your t-shirt, we are fearless lawyers. And we need to remember this. This means, it's not just removal defense lawyers. This is naturalization, family lawyers. This is business lawyers. All of us have to find ways to be fearless, zealous advocates for our clients in these times to offer them and the country solutions to the challenges that we face. Get your t-shirt, get your training at the Justice Campaign booth. We have opportunities to help folks think about how they can be aggressive advocates. So I want to focus on three things that we absolutely can do. Number one, and this is something we don't talk enough about, so I'm starting with it. You must, particularly if you're a small or solo practitioner, you must focus on your business health and your personal health. If you're not paying attention, if you're not investing in your success, your own success and yourself, then you're not going to be able to weather this storm. So we have a ton of resources if, as like me, we didn't learn business in law school. If you've got questions about how do you build a business plan, how do you develop a marketing plan, we've got resources at the Practice Management Center, trainings, to give you the opportunity to focus on that. The less time that you spend worried about paying the bills, keeping the lights on, building staff, the more time you can focus on being an outstanding lawyer. And the more time you spend on yourself, making sure that you have the internal ability to weather this storm, the more likely we were all going to be able to get on the other side of this storm much better and stronger than we were before. So we don't talk about it enough, but please, please, use the self-help resources that we have, use the business resources that we have. We want and need you to be successful so you can be those amazing lawyers. Your business plan needs to include thinking about the other thing we must do, which is litigate, litigate, litigate. And this is not, yes, we have had great impact litigation. The Immigration Council and AILA have had some enormous successes, and others around the country on impact litigation. But we need an army of 16,000 lawyers incorporating federal court litigation into their practices. It's going to be great for our profession. It's going to be what we need in responding to the agency. We are standing up a mandamus campaign to specifically focus on providing resources and training to do mandamus actions, to unstick some of the cases that are interminably stuck in the agency. Litigation has to be part of our toolbox, part of the weapon that we bring to the table. So approach this not from the perspective that somebody else will do it, but approach it from this perspective that this can be something that you do in your daily practice as part of your business model, as part of a larger strategy to engage the agency. And finally, we can and should continue to engage with Congress. Now, unlike litigation, where we have the opportunity to fight a lot of these small fights that only the people in this room understand, all of these very detailed gripes and concerns and outrage about these policy changes. But in the broader public and legislative debate, we cannot fight on 1,000 fronts. We have to find ways to talk about these issues that people will understand, that our members of Congress will understand. That's the reason that what we have done in terms of our advocacy and legislative priorities is to focus on 3 campaigns that we think capture a lot of the issues that we're dealing with here. First is USCIS accountability, and we have had great success getting members of Congress writing letters and concerned about the fact that the agency is single-handedly trying to stop legal immigration to the United States. Talk to your members of Congress. That is an area where there is bipartisan support. Talk to them about, explain your cases in the larger context of the agency needs to be held accountable for what it's doing. Congress writes the laws, not them. They need to be accountable to the laws that Congress has created. There's a lot of appetite, I think, out for that. Second, it's been mentioned by Jeremy and others, the outrage about what happens in immigration court every day has to be explained to the public in terms they can understand, to members of Congress in terms they can understand, and that is, there is not a neutral, independent judge deciding our cases. Every day, our system is created and supporting, generally, injustice. It is 2 sides against one, or excuse me, the prosecutors and the judges on one side against us. We need immigration court reform. It's critical. I think it's an important time to raise that issue. And finally, we have to continue to push back on the assault on asylum. Again, a lot of energy and enthusiasm out there standing up for the long, proud tradition of the United States as a place that protects people who flee from violence and persecution. So those are 3 umbrellas that I think we can continue to talk to our friends and neighbors, members of Congress about. All right, I want to end on a happy note. I have in my office 2 quotes that I keep right by my desk so I can read them every day. And one is from Thomas Jefferson, and it says, "A little patience, and we shall see the reign of witches pass over. Their spells dissolve, and the people, recovering their true sight, restore their government to its true principles. It is true that in the meantime we are suffering deeply in spirit. But if the game runs sometimes against us at home, we must have patience till luck turns, and then we shall have an opportunity of winning back the principles we have lost. For this is a game where principles are at stake." And then the other quote, simple, Thomas Paine, "If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, so that my children may know peace." So we didn't ask for this fight, but here it is. We're waging it on behalf of our profession. We're waging it on behalf of our clients. We're waging it on behalf of the next generation. So let's go into this fight prepared to win.
Just want to reiterate, we are more than a bar association. We are a community, and I can't be more excited to be a part of you. So thank you, and we're going to win this war.